Hi there, Grand Design owners. Today in your 2022 Grand Design Imagine trailer, we're going to be taking a look at and showing you how to install bronze bushings from Dexter. Bronze bushings from Dexter here are going to be a great accessory for upgrading your trailer from its factory suspension system. Here we've got our factory equalizer, and you can see in the equalizer it has plastic never fail bushings. And these are self-lubricating bushings. But this is a 22 trailer, and we're still in 22, and you can see how worn out they already are. I mean, they're pretty bad on this top one especially, and not too hot on some of the one on the spring eye there. And if your bushings fail to where they're completely worn out, you now have play between the bolt that's connecting your equalizer or suspension together. And every time you hit a bump or something, that bolt's gonna go up and down and inside that play, and it's just gonna slam, 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 and it's gonna oblong these holes. Well, once they become oblonged, if you put a new bushing in it, your bushing is just gonna fail prematurely because of the space around it. So it is important to check these. If your bushing completely fails and you have an oblong hole, you'll need to replace your component. So by going with the bronze bushing set, we can extend the life of our suspension components by being able to lubricate our bushings, which will extend the life of them. These never fail ones, again, they're self-lubricating, but if you maintain your bronze bushings with wet bolts and keep them greased, they're gonna outlast this never fail style. Now, if you're somebody that doesn't want to maintain their trailer, just wants to use it, that's it, kind of forget it, then I would recommend staying with the plastic never fail style bushings, because if you don't grease them, if you don't grease your bronze bushings, the plastic ones will outlive an ungreased bronze bushing. But if you're going to maintain them, you can usually get significantly longer life out of properly greased bushings over the plastic style here. Again, these didn't even make it a year and they're already looking in pretty rough shape. These ones should give them plenty of years of service as long as they maintain keeping grease in them. Now with the bronze bushings, it's a great upgrade, but some other things I would recommend: when you go with the bronze bushing, you do need to put a wet bolt in it. Your factory bolts with these plastic styles are not going to be wet bolts, so they won't have any Zerk fitting in it. So I would recommend getting a wet bolt kit, so that way you can lubricate those bushings. Now you do not want to put a wet bolt kit though in with these plastic bushings. The grease can actually deteriorate the plastic bushing and cause those to fail prematurely. They're supposed to be self-lubricating. So you don't want to mix and match. But going with bronze and a wet bolt is going to give us a setup that we can maintain and extend the life. And you can also go with upgraded equalizers as well to help ease out your bushings and stuff here by absorbing some of those road impacts. Lippert's Road Armor is one of the options that we have here at eTrailer that can work to help absorb those road impacts and extend the life of your suspension and smooth out the ride of your trailer. So we went ahead and used a wet bolt kit as well as our equalizer in addition to our bronze bushings here to give a heavier duty repaired suspension on our Grand Design here. We'll begin our installation by jacking up our trailer, and you want to make sure you support it under the frame with jack stands. We've got some at the front, and we're using our lift here in the back to support the rear end that we lifted it up with. At home you can just use your floor jack and jack stands. Now if you don't have a really powerful impact, you might want to crack each one of the lug nuts loose before you lift it up while the weight's still on the tire, because if you try to use a wrench with it now, it's just going to spin. You're going to have a really hard time. But if you have a powerful impact, you should be able to zip them off. I went ahead and already cracked them all loose, so that way they're going to be easier to take off now that we've got it up in the air. We'll then remove our wheels. The lug nut size can vary. Ours is going to be a 19 millimeter, but typical sizes are usually a 19 or a 21 is kind of the most common size. So we already cracked ours loose, so they come off pretty easily. And we're going to be removing both our wheels. So once you get this one loose, go ahead and take it off, set it to the side, and then we'll remove our other one. Once our wheels are out of the way, we want to make sure that we support our axles, because when we take our hardware loose here, they can drop down some, and we're going to have to lift them up with a jack or something to make them line up so we can get our hardware back installed. So I've placed jack stands underneath each one, close to this side. Now I did leave a gap on the jack stands. Those are kind of just there for emergency to catch it if it goes too low, because we're going to need to move them up and down just a little bit to install it. So the majority of the work's going to be done with your floor jack. You'll want to place one underneath each axle. If you only have one floor jack, then on the other axle, you would want to make sure your jack stand is fully touching the axle, so that way you can just move one at a time and you can move your jack back and forth as necessary. We're also going to set up another one under this axle though, because we do have 2 jacks. If you have 2, it'll make your life a lot easier. And we're just bumping it right underneath the U-bolt, just till it kind of touches, a little bit of support there, and that's really where we want to stay. We're underneath, we're looking at the back side of the equalizer here. To remove the equalizer, you'll have to take out all these bolts. And boy, look at that movement there. You can tell that the bushings are a little worn out on that one, and they're a little bit worn out on this one too. So to assist us in this install, since our new equalizer comes with bronze bushings pre-installed, those bronze bushings are designed to take grease and use wet bolts. This old style that we've got here is a dry bolt setup with never fail bushings. They're a plastic type self-lubricating bushings, and you don't want to grease those. The grease can actually damage the bushing, but I mean, they call them never fail, but in my opinion, they don't last as long as the bronze bushings. Now, if you never grease your setup, the never fails will last longer than a bronze bushing, but if you grease your bronze bushings, they typically have a much longer life than the never fail plastic style. Again, as long as you're maintaining grease on them when you take it out. So we're going to use an 11/16 socket to remove these nuts. You may or may not need a 13/16 to hold it. They are spline, so they shouldn't spin. I'm going to put it on there anyway to prevent it from spinning. Just makes it help come out a little bit easier, and we'll zip these off. So I've got a 13/16 to hold the other side because it is bigger. The nuts are smaller at 11/16. So we'll take out all the nuts. You do want to save your nuts because we're going to be using those. There may be some instances where your impact's just not going to be able to pull it out, so we do have a wrench down here or a ratchet to be able to help us. We're just going to move on for a minute. Continue getting these out of here. Now in the wet bolt kit that we're going to be using, we're also going to be replacing all the never fail bushings with bronze bushings. So I would recommend doing that too, so that way you can lubricate all of your setup here and have a nice working suspension system. All right, we'll just switch to our ratchet for those if the gun can't take it out. It's not uncommon for an impact to struggle with these because there's so much play. You saw how much play was there. That play really absorbs a lot of the impact. Now when you take these off by hand, it's also not uncommon that your axles might want to move on you a little bit. So we just need to crack it loose. See how it's going to lift up a little? That's pretty normal. Don't worry about that. Usually once you crack it loose, the gun can usually take care of the rest of it from there. We'll put our wrench on the other side just to make sure. Okay, and we are going to be taking out the spring eyes on the end as well and replacing those with wet bolts and bronze bushings. So we'll be doing that as well. I recommend you do that at home also while you're doing this. So once you've got these loose though, we should be able to take these off of there. They should be fairly easy since our axles are being supported, so it's kind of supported in a neutral state where our hardware should slide out of there pretty darn easy like that. Now the upper bolt here is pressed in to the hanger here, so you'll have to drive it out. These are pressed into the shackles, so they come out when you just pull the shackle out. We are going to be replacing these as well. These are 2 1/4 inch shackles. For our road armor, we're going to be using 3 1/8 inch shackles that are a little bit longer to compensate for the slightly different dimensions of the equalizer. They also have heavier duty shackles, so they're thicker, better shackles too. So we'll get this bolt out next. We're going to take one of the nuts that we just took off and we're going to thread it on there a couple of turns. This is going to do a few things for us. One, if you're planning on reusing these bolts, this is going to save your threads from getting damaged. We're going to try a different nut though. I don't like the way that one feels. The other thing this is also going to do, beyond saving the thread so you can reuse the bolt, this is also going to prevent you from mushrooming the end of the bolt here, because if you hit it and it starts to spread out and mushroom, it might get so wide that you can't get it to slide out, and then you're just going to be fighting it. So this will make your life a lot easier, and now we're just going to strike it and drive it on out. One good whack there and it brings it down to the end of our bolt, or the nut here, to the face. So we'll just unthread that now. And most of the time you can just pull it out from there. If you need to, you can tap it out with your hammer, but usually once you get that initial drive, she comes out pretty easy. So you can see there's that plastic never fail bushings in there. Our new one's gonna have all bronze, so we're gonna update these as well. So while we're down here, we might as well do that. So we're gonna go ahead and just take the bolt that we just used there, and we're gonna use that to drive out these bushings. You could also use a similar size socket, one that's close to this size, but ever so slightly smaller, so it'll drive through. But I actually just prefer the bolt. You got it right here, you just took it out, it works great. If you look at the bolt, it's got a shoulder on it, so that shoulder fits on the lip of your bushing pretty well. And we're just gonna use this to drive this out of there. We'll drive this one out as well. Now you do want to keep in mind that the bushings and the wet bolts and stuff don't come with your equalizers. You will have to purchase those separately. Sometimes these plastic bushings do kind of fold in on you. So you just got to fold it in a couple of times and then it'll finally grab and start to drive out. Now we're going to drive in our new bushings. Again, these didn't come in the kit. You can buy a pack of 4 bushings like this. They're 9/16 for the inner diameter there, 11/16 outer diameter. I always like to check them. If this pushes in there super easy, then the leaf spring is damaged. And it's close. It has worn a little bit, but I'm still going to have to drive it in there. So always check them. If you push your thing, if this just like slides, boom, it just shoots straight through, the leaf spring has already, the bushing has already worn out to a point where it has damaged the spring eye, and you'll need to replace the entire spring at that point, or else you're still just going to get a bunch of slamming and you're just going to repeatedly destroy new bushings because of the out of roundness there, or the expanded, not no longer a tight fit. But that is still pretty snug. It's just a little bit right there, so we'll be okay. I'm going to use a little bit of silicone spray just to make the bushing drive in a hair easier. And then we're going to drive it in. Now to drive it in, you could use a similar size socket like we talked about. But again, I like to use the bolts. The bolts work out well. It fits in there, slides right in like that. We've got a nice head to drive on. So we're just going to put that in there and we're going to drive it on in. When you're driving it in, you do want to make sure the bolt is flush against the head. If you hit it like this, it has that momentum and you'll end up mushrooming the outside a little. So make sure the bolt is all the way flush when you strike. And yeah, that one pushed in pretty darn easy. Usually is a little bit more difficult than that. This one is on the edge of this leaf spring eye being worn out, but we should be okay. It was tight enough to where it's taken up most of the outside, so that should be fine. We've kind of caught it right there at the end before further damage was going to require replacement. So now we'll drive in this one. We're going to do it the same way. Slide it in our bolt, get it lined up, and then tap it in. And that's closer to what it should feel like if you have a nice, good eye layer. All right. And now we've got that one drove in. Needs to go just a hair more. All right, there we go. That feels good. So we've got those taken care of. We'll now take our road armor. This is the road armor. This side's going to be the outward facing edge, but you can see here that it has bronze bushings pre-installed for us. So that's why we want to use wet bolts, and that's also why we're updating the rest of our system to accept wet bolts and bronze bushings, so that way you can grease everything, and that usually makes a big difference in the length of your suspension components lasting, because you can keep those lubricated. So now we're going to go ahead and slide this up. We do have new bolts that we're going to be using up there, new wet bolts, so I'm going to grab those now and we'll get that up there in place. All right, so we've got our new wet bolt here. This is the Lippert Road Armor aftermarket parts kit. So this kit is designed to work with the road armor to update with the correct shackle lengths and the correct bolt length, all wet bolts. The wet bolt kit though does not come with the bronze bushing, so you will have to purchase those separate. So this is just gonna slide up in here. Our bolt will slide through. And then we're gonna place a nut on the other side. But we're not gonna fully tighten this down just yet, because the bolt is serrated on the one edge, so it's not pushing in all the way. We're gonna have to come out here on the outside and we're gonna have to drive it in. So this is just another one of the bolts here that you get in the kit. You can see it's exactly like this one, and there's that serrated edge. So the bolt will push in until it hits that, and then it fits tightly in there to prevent it from being able to rotate. So we're gonna drive it in, but we've got a grease zerk fitting there. So we're gonna use a socket. You can take the square end and fit over your zerk fitting, and we can drive the socket to push our bolt in. All right, we've got it most of the way drove in. Looks like there might be a small gap, but at this point we should be able to tighten up the nut. If we still see a small gap, we'll come back out here and tap it a little bit and then retighten the nut. Back here on the back side, I pulled the nut off just to look at it. You want to make sure the shoulder, the flat part of the bolt, is inside the hole here. Because if you got the threads just sitting on that when you tighten this down, you're actually going to be pinching this hanger between the shoulder and the nut. So ours is resting in there good, so we're ready to just put this on and send it on home. It's going to be the same size hardware, or same size socket and wrench for our new bolt. And again, I am going to hold it just to prevent it from spinning. All right, now that we've got it cinched down, we're going to head back out there, tap it, and we'll come back in here and finalize tightening it down. So I'm just going to hit it once or twice there just to make sure it is fully seated. Because this second time that we're hitting it here, we've now got a little bit of bolt pressure from us clamping it to help it drive in, and we're now plenty solid. So we're just going to tap it real quick. These don't have a real high torque spec, so we're not going to go crazy with it. We're just going to kind of hit it just to drive it in. And yeah, that'll be good enough for there. We'll come back with our torque wrench at the end and finalize torquing them. So at this point now, if you're not going to change out your spring eyes, you can go ahead and go back together with the new hardware that comes with the Lippert hardware kit for your road armor. Again, that is a separate part. But we are replacing the bushings across, because in your Lippert kit here, the wet bolt kit for the road armor, you do get new wet bolts for your spring eyes, and if you don't change out the bushing, you don't want to put them in there, because again, those never fail as a plastic bushing. The grease will deteriorate that bushing and you're going to have premature failure because of it. So you want to make sure you're changing out the bushing to a bronze one if you're going to use the wet bolt. So we're going to go ahead and do that now. I'm going to go ahead and get those replaced before we hook up this, because we'll have a little bit more axle movement to be able to drop down and do our spring eyes before we put our shackles in. So to do our spring eyes, if you're following along and you also purchased the same wet bolt kit and enough bronze bushings, you'll just head over here and we're going to remove this just like we did the center one for our equalizer. So we're taking the nut off, threading the nut back on there, a few turns, drive it out. And it's not uncommon for these ones to be pretty tight. You might have to raise or lower your jack a little bit to get it out of there. Looks like maybe we need to go down just a hair. There we go, we were almost at the sweet spot, right there. And you can kind of tell the sweet spot if your bolt's sticking straight out. If it's angled down a little bit, you need to jack it up some. If it's angled up, you need to let it down some. So we got that one out of there. Now, we got this jack here, and we got a nice little gap there, because we want to lower this down now. But what I want to try to do is when I'm lowering this, I want the spring eye to be down enough where I can drive my bushing out, but up just high enough to where the top of the leaf spring is still between these two pieces. That'll give you a little more support when you're driving and make it drive out a whole lot easier. So we're coming down. So now we've got it down here, just like our other ones, we're going to drive this out with the bolt. So now we're taking our bushing, we're just sliding it over that bolt. That'll be a good piece to drive in. Again, we're checking that too, fitment, it can't push straight through, so our spring eye seems okay. And we just drive it on in. All right, that feels good. So now we'll just raise this one back up. May have to position it just a little bit differently. And then we can insert our new bolt. And you may need to go up or down slightly as necessary to get this to line up. We're pretty close there. There we go. And just like with our other bolt, the serrated edge does need to be driven into the hanger. So we're going to do that with our socket here on the outside again. All right, and this looks good. Same as with our middle one, we want to make sure that shoulder is inside the hole, which we are lined up. So now we'll put on our new nut and snug it on down. All right, and then as soon as that kind of hits there, we're just going to stop and we'll finalize torquing it. You may or may not need again to tap it from the outside after snugging it up some to fully seat it if it's not fully seated. We're now going to head over to the other spring eye on the other side at the front of the trailer, on the front axle, and then we'll head back to our equalizer in the middle once we get that one done. All right, we got our spring eyes on the ends installed and back together, bronze bushings throughout. We can head back to our equalizer now. These are the heavy-duty shackles. They have the bolts, wet bolts pre-installed in them. This is for the Lippert Road Armor hardware kit. Again, it doesn't come with the road armors. So to install these now, we've got everything on jack stands so we can make it easy on ourselves by lifting it up and down. The first one's really easy because you can just kind of rotate this back and forth to get it to line up and get your bolts pushed through there. We'll then place our other shackle on the other side, making sure you get it over the shoulder of the bolts. And then we'll install our nuts on there. And we can just leave them loose here for a minute while we go to put the other one on. All right. Now when we go to install the other one here, if you take it up there and hold it up, it's not quite perfect on the way it's lining up. We need to raise this axle just a little bit. So just pump that up a couple pumps and look at there. Slides right in nice and easy now, just by lifting that up just a little bit. Place our shackle on the other side. Now this is where usually you find a little bit of trouble, but actually that's lining up pretty good. It's on the shoulder of each one. Sometimes if you can't get this inner piece to go over the shoulders while you're pushing it together, you can just take your hammer and just kind of tap downwards on this a little bit, and usually you can get it to walk on there. Now we'll put those on there and then we can go ahead and snug them down. Again, it's all the same size hardware as before, or same size socket and wrenches as before, so our 11/16 for the nut, 13/16 for the bolts. All right, we'll now go back and torque all of our hardware to the manufacturer's specifications. We can now go back and grease all of our wet bolts. And we're gonna put a little extra in this one because it's coming out this side. We wanna try and see some come out on the other side as well. So might have to grab a rag. There we go, I see it coming out on the other side now. We'll clean up any mess we make, but it is important you get grease all the way to the other side of the bushing. You can just wipe that mess away. So we'll just continue that, moving on down and greasing the rest of our bolts. Now that we've got this side completed with all of our bushings replaced, our new road armor, and everything greased, we can now go ahead and move over to the other side. Make sure you move all your jacks and everything over to that side, and you can perform the same installation over there. Once you've got both sides installed, we can go back and put our wheels in place. Just lift those in there, reinstall your lug nuts. Once we snug down our lug nuts and get our trailer back on the ground, we want to make sure we torque our lug nuts to the manufacturer's specification. Once you've completed both of your equalizers and everything, we can go back and put our wheels on. After we get the wheels on and tightened down, don't forget to torque them once you get it back on the ground. When tightening down your bolts, you'll want to do it in a star pattern to draw it in equally against the hub face. And that completes our installation of Dexter's bronze bushings on our 2022 Grand Design Imagine.